where we discuss the business of cybersecurity. Here are your co-hosts and cybersecurity experts, Brian Horning, Reginald Andre, and Randy Bryan.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Security Squawk podcast. I'm your co-host, Brian Horning, here with Randy Bryan and Reginald Andre. Welcome to another week, another show, gentlemen. Feels like we were just together like the other day because we were.
Friday. Yeah, I think we were.
Yeah, we were. Just a few days ago, we did a late show because I was under the weather, and I'm still under the weather, unfortunately. So I'm going to rely on my co-host here to help me get through the show. My brain's not working like it usually does today, so I apologize. But we got a good show. We have a major transportation company under cyber attack. We have an interesting cyber attack against the same company that caused the Target cyber attack, the big one that Target had many years ago. Interesting because it involves maybe not phishing this time and something else. So we're going to kind of get into that. Then we have St. Louis Metro. They're under a cyber attack. There's a city down in Mississippi that we want to cover. And then there's also the Prospect Medical Holdings, an interesting perspective and look at this hospital's kind of their dealing of the situation, what they kind of went through and what they're still dealing with about 2 months since their hospital was attacked by ransomware. So we'll definitely get into all that today. But before we do, Andre, what's our fee for the show?
The fee is free $99. There is no cost to the to listening to our show. There's no sponsors or anything like that or commercial breaks. All we ask is to share it and to if you have your boss or coworkers that are decision makers in the technology aspect, to share the show.
Yeah, it's pretty critical right now, Brian, just that we get the word out and get people talking about this stuff and understanding the stuff because there's so much going on right now.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, just sharing, liking, subscribing helps the algorithm, helps other random people, your friends, your followers, or maybe people that are connected with you on different platforms. These social media companies will suggest our content to them by you giving us a vote of confidence when you see our stuff. So we thank you. So first one we want to get into is we kind of cruise the internet here and look for what's happening in the world this week. Coming off the heels of some pretty big cyber attacks, guys, here in 2023. We're on the heels of MGM, of the ones we talked about on Friday. But here we have the fourth largest LTL player by sales, which if you don't know what LTL stands for, it's less than a truckload. So you can kind of think of that as in between the service that's in between you just sending like one package through FedEx or UPS versus, going all the way up to like a whole entire tractor trailer when you maybe need to ship a pallet or something large. Like if you order furniture online or you order appliances online, they usually come on a service called LTL. And this company, Estes Express Lines, disclosed today that they have shared notice regarding an ongoing IT infrastructure outage, and this outage appears to be the result of a cyber attack. It says, yesterday we shared notice regarding ongoing IT infrastructure outage and can confirm today that this outage appears to be the result of a cyber attack. While we are unable to share specific details at this time, our terminals and drivers are effectively picking up and delivering freight while we work through this event. We're working as quickly as possible to resolve this issue and return to business as usual. We are immensely grateful for the dedication and responsiveness of our more than 22,000 employees and the way they've banded together to keep serving our customers and each other. We also extend our appreciation to customers and vendors for their patience and support during a challenging time. We will continue to share updates with you as we work through this incident. So, what do you guys think here?
We actually have a client that's a fairly large trucking company here in our region. And, when you think of these type of trucking companies, you just think, oh, it's just a guy in the truck. They load a few pallets in and they just use Waze to go through traffic. But there's actually a lot of technology that goes involved in it. And one of them is having this, like their internal CRM system that basically numbers the boxes. So that way they can just know exactly, what belongs to which customer. And I can only imagine if those things are down, they're in middle of nowhere. The truckers don't have a printer. They have no real way of accessing home office. And this is a company with 22,000 employees. So it's something that's going to be a huge inconvenience for these truckers.
Yeah. And, they don't really go into everything right now, but we know just how things are. There's probably a lot of chaos behind the scenes. It says that they're picking up and making deliveries. I guess they're doing it on pencil and paper at this point. These kind of things are really, really disturbing. We're a day or two into it, and it's great to read a hopeful message coming from the company, but the reality is payday's coming. How are they going to pay people? They've got to receive money for these shipments that they do. Are they still able to?
They also got to be able to prove that they actually got to be able to prove that they delivered what they shipped.
Right.
There's a lot of little things here that are going to be just horrible to have to work through.
One of the things that just caught my eyes as I was reading that statement is that's not a typical statement we see nowadays from a company. Usually we hear things and we can kind of debate whether we think this is an issue or kind of like reading the tea leaves a little bit as to where this company's maturity was from a cybersecurity standpoint, right? But typically you see things around like, we've hired outside firms. We're working with the best of the best in the world when it comes to cybersecurity to work through this issue. You're hearing things about maybe some of their incident response and what they're doing around that. And you're not really hearing that here. You're kind of hearing we thank our employees and we thank our vendors and customers for kind of sticking with us and kind of going above and beyond as we work through these issues. That's what struck me when I read that. Did you guys have a similar kind of like reaction to that, or do you have a different perspective?
No, it's definitely different. So maybe they have they haven't polished or gone over, their incident response plan as far as how to properly. I don't know though, because the thing is, a lot of times we hear that and it's like, yeah, that's the common thing to say. It's the copy and paste. So it is different.
It's different. It makes you wonder if they have cyber insurance and if there's a breach attorney involved, right? Because typically we see these canned responses these days where we kind of, okay, it sounds like they're definitely working with some kind of breach coach or breach attorney that's advising them on what to say. It's interesting. It's almost a little bit foreshadowing to me, kind of saying like, we want to extend our appreciation to customers and vendors. It's like you haven't seen the repercussions of that yet. So, right. I mean, it's almost like premature to extend your appreciation and to put it in their words, I think, because the ramifications of your customers and your vendors, your vendors being annoyed that they're probably not going to get paid on time and your customers not getting their deliveries on time. That hasn't come through yet, right? So,
well, it could also kind of be a sign of the times as well, Brian, just because we're hearing more and more of these in the news. In fact, probably more people heard about the one in the last few weeks with MGM than anything we've had recently. And, maybe their vendors are saying, gosh, y'all, we understand it could happen to the best of us. And, maybe they are getting positive responses from their vendors, from their customers, from their employees, kind of a attitude of, we're kind of all in the same boat in there, but for the grace of God, go I kind of mentality. I don't know. That's when I read that, I also think that like there's people that are, rather than getting all ticked off, like we had a large food distributor here in our area, a nationwide food distributor, get hit about 2 years ago, and tons of customers just bailed and went to another food distributor because they're restaurants. They needed to get access to stuff, you know, and I don't know if that's going to happen here or not, but anyway, maybe that's why they're talking like that.
That's a good point. That's a good point. So good luck with Estes. They're on the hook here. We'll update everyone as we learn more, and when we see how they make it through this particular, what sounds like a ransomware attack. And interestingly enough, on that note, going into kind of this retrospective on what we wanted to talk about on this Prospect Medical Holdings, Connecticut hospitals, when they were attacked in August with ransomware. And there's been a nice write-up here on kind of what this hospital has dealt with since their attack back in August. So we're going to kind of run through that with everybody so they kind of understand, like, what the situation was for this holding company that owns 3 facilities in Connecticut that were affected by this attack. But there's a lot of interesting little details that happened during this recovery process that we want to kind of highlight and bring to people's attention, because there's a lot here. So I'm going to stop talking. You guys, one of you guys, take over reading, because I'm not going to be able to go through this article.
Yeah, sure. And then Randy, help me out. But the first thing I want to mention is that the only reason that we're able to even see this is because of the Freedom of Information Act, and that the fact it was dealing with public dollars and also with the medical side. But usually we don't get the behind the scenes of like these timelines of what's going on. So you have, for 17 days, Manchester Memorial Hospital was basically crippled with this cyber attack. The first thing that we see here is, let me pull it up. So we have Eastern Connecticut Health Network had to send its employees, ordering them to log off all their computers or any workstation on wheels, and not to access any hospital computer systems, from x-rays to prescriptions. I mean, that alone is scary. Imagine you're the patient there, and now all of a sudden all technology is turned off, and anything connected to the network or to the internet no longer is providing your nurses and doctors the information that you need. So that part is scary. You want to go ahead, Randy, and then I'll take it from there?
Yeah, I mean, the crazy thing about this is having to do things like that by hand instead of over a computer. Also, having to do records by hand. It says that they cut nearly half of their elective procedures. They also were having to divert. So over the course of 6 weeks, they sent out 29 notices. So literally 2 out of 3 days, they were sending out notices to ambulance companies and other people that provide like critical care out in the field. They were sending these messages: do not bring people to our ER. We can't handle them. And the crazy thing is, now these hospitals, the company that owns them, the holding company that holds them, is considering selling them to Yale, which would make them nonprofit hospitals. And it kind of begs us, we got to dig a little deeper here, but how these kind of attacks are so crippling on businesses that, the statistics, around 60% of businesses that get hit with a breach like this end up out of business within like 6 months, because they're so crippling. We don't realize how crippling it is. We got to get into that a little bit while we're talking about it.
Another thing too is how they alerted, which I find is interesting. They sent an alert via email to these different ambulance companies and other providers, not to send them any emergency cases via email. But like, what happens if someone doesn't see the email or it goes to spam? I just found that to be a little interesting in their procedure.
And the other thing is, anytime you're in a breach like this, you need to pretty much assume that your email system's borked. that they're in the middle of it. So, you know, they're fortunate that they weren't sending out these notices and they were just getting deleted by the bad actors. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and or even if, again, just what if their emails went down? Then like, what's your next step? You know, but I understand given the certain amount of time that they have to do the notification, email is probably the fastest. But I just felt that it was an interesting way of telling people not to send emergency patients via email, hoping that they saw the email.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that stands out to me, which I want to point out, is, you know, and why I want to point it out is because a lot of businesses that I deal with anyway aren't going to have the luxury that this group had, because,
Right.
you know, they were unable to bill Medicaid for payment. So that, quote unquote, according to the article, forced the State Department of Social Services to advance them about $7.5 million. There's no private business that's ever going to have that luxury to get fronted for, unless they go take out a loan, obviously. But like, they didn't. Number one, the Department of Social Services probably didn't have to do that, right? That was a state function that said, okay, we have a pot of money over here, we can give it to you to help you out through this situation, knowing that eventually you're going to be able to bill Medicaid and then we'll get that money back, would be my assumption. But I mean, that's pretty wild to me. I mean, that's a big help to get through this at the end of the day, in my opinion, because if they didn't get that money, I think things would be tremendously worse for them when it comes to their ability to recover.
But it sounds like they were operating kind of like the saying, living check to check. The fact that you didn't have a reserve that you had to go run to the state for $7 million, where you didn't have, 4 or 5 months of operations, at least as for a hospital.
Yeah. I mean, that's pretty much modern life at this point. Andre, where I think most businesses are living check to check. I think that's why they end up such a large percentage go out of business within 6 months, is because they are living check to check, don't have any kind of reserves, and any kind of interruption is a deadly interruption. It's like they're already on life support, just because they're barely making it. So, cut off that IV and then they're done. So I use a little medical analogy there.
So there's a
tough trial this week.
So there's a public official named Kristen McCarthy Vahey, who's on the Public Health Committee. And she said executives are describing the recovery as slow. And they said they're struggling to get all systems back online. They continue to use paper checks to pay vendors, and it will likely take a few more months for everything to get fully sorted out. It's a very involved and lengthy process. So let's talk about some ways businesses can not find themselves in this situation, right? I mean, we talk about this stuff all the time on the show, but like, how does a business not have to be down for months and months and months like this, so they don't have to operate for a very lengthy period of time using paper checks and what have you to kind of muddle through the situation? I guess we can all throw one out. I'll go last. So,
first, I'm going to say prepare. One of the things the article mentioned is that they found that each nurse was basically having to stay in each room to do the monitoring of the devices, because if someone's heart rate dropped, there's no more technology that's going to beep, do a beeper to the nurse or to the doctor. So first thing, not answering your question directly, Brian, is prepare to make sure that you actually think about, all right, if all devices turned off, if we lost the internet, if our internal network went down, if a switch went down, like something even like that, what would happen? And then to answer your question, Brian, one of the things is isolate. There should be systems in place where you have your accounting, marketing, legal, all of these different things that are not just one big network that's all talking to each other, but you should put in a system where that if something does happen to one department, the other departments can continue working, like how we talked about MGM a few weeks ago.
Right. Yeah. And I would say that there really should have been, and there probably will be now, some sort of a cybersecurity risk assessment where, like literally cybersecurity 101, 101.11 or whatever you want to call it is identify. And I'm really adding to what you were saying, Andre, is they really needed to identify all of their existing systems, and then make sure that they're not so reliant on each other that if one goes down, it brings down the whole thing. There needs to be resilience among their systems. By systems right now, we're talking about processes. Also, that could apply to machines as well, sub networks, and everything like that. I'm not sure if I answered your question though. At this point, I kind of forgot what it was, Brian.
It's like what can businesses do so they're not down for months and months? A quicker response, a quicker recovery, right?
Yeah, you know what you got to know what you have, and then you've got to build it in such a way that it's resilient, and build it in such a way that when you do have an attack, the blast radius is limited. Instead of bringing down the whole thing, it's a half-day blip, instead of being something that's 6 months long to get out of.
Yeah, and if you're a hospital, that is someone's full-time position dealing with that, because not only are you like doing the theory, but then you have to then say, okay, let's do it. Let's make sure that our staff is trained. And of course, we already know there's nurses shortages and things like that, so you can't even probably get a lot of their time. But then it goes from the top where you have to make sure that the executives, the board is making sure that these personnel are doing the proper training for these type of events.
Yeah, just to add to that again, that they really ought to be looking at a co-managed type of situation like this, where, yeah, you probably do have a full-time person. Do they really have the bandwidth to excel in cybersecurity and keep all the systems running? Most likely they don't have the physical capable bandwidth to make that happen. And to be able to bring in a co-managed company that can focus more on the cybersecurity while the in-house IT deals with making sure the networks are running and people's computers are up to date and things like that, that can be a very much needed thing to add to this particular situation or situation like this.
And here's one of the quotes from the doctors that went through this incident. I know we have a lot more to do and need to start to have these conversations, because it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when more attacks are going to happen. Wow. Shame on us if we don't learn from what has happened. And I'm here to say shame on them, because it's going to happen again and they're not going to learn from this lesson.
Yeah, and that's actually that doctor is actually a public official, and I actually think when we post the show, we'll post a link to this article, because the article is lengthy. We won't have the time on the show today to go through the whole thing and all the details of kind of. There's like almost a play-by-play here of what happened like every day, and it's a very dynamic situation. There were people looking to acquire these hospitals at the time. That put a lot of question marks on whether those people should continue with purchasing the hospital. They also, go through kind of a play-by-play of like people realizing that, patients weren't being medicated properly as a result of this. The interesting, eye-opening thing to me was the amount of money that the state of Connecticut probably laid out sending state officials, inspectors, and things like that to make sure that this hospital was providing adequate care during this event. So not only do you have the hospital unable to perform its normal duties, so it's going to cause them to lose money, on top of the Medicare issue, not being able to bill, now you have the state and taxpayers incurring costs because this hospital was cyber attacked. And, it doesn't, taxpayers are paying for those inspectors to show up at that hospital and make sure things are running right. And that's kind of, where things are at with this hospital and what they've learned and what's going on. So, good stuff here, guys. I mean, this is a pretty cool article. Like I said, we'll link to it where we can. So if you follow us or watch us on social media, you can go through this article yourself. It's very lengthy, probably take about a half hour to read through, but there's a lot of good information there, a lot of lessons learned. And the interesting thing to me is both entities, the hospital and the state, are looking at this situation and trying to learn from it, which is a good thing.
Mhm.
Right. I think that the state needs to learn, kind of like we've learned over the years, guys. You got to isolate your risk, right? There is overlap in what maybe the state provides in terms of like social services and things like that. And they have to understand that, they could be impacted. They could lose money. This is third-party risk. This is stuff we talk about a lot now. The state has to recognize that by providing the types of social services that they do to these hospitals, it could impact them. It could cost them more money. It could blow out their budget if a hospital that they associate with has a cyber attack, as you can see from here. And that's a big warning to government officials on the social services side who are involved in healthcare decisions in your state, and also hospital administrators. So, all right, guys. So Johnson Controls. I know Randy's like chomping at the bit to talk about this one. Johnson Controls, as I mentioned at the top of the show, they were the ones that were, if you remember back in the day, there was this Target hack, and everybody's talked about Target being hacked for over a decade now, it seems. Was actually Johnson Controls was the company who was the contractor, who was actually the reason Target got breached, right? And here we have Johnson Controls in another situation that I'm going to let Randy take the reins on and fill us in on what's going on at Johnson Controls.
Yeah, I'm going to read a little bit of the article. They suffered a massive ransomware attack, potentially impacting the Department of Homeland Security. So it says in a regulatory SEC filing, the industrial control systems manufacturer said its operations were disrupted after a cybersecurity incident affected parts of its IT infrastructure. It says they initiated their incident response plan, launched an investigation with external cybersecurity experts, and started coordinating with insurers. The company continues to assess what information was impacted and is executing its incident management and protection plan, including implementing remediation measures to mitigate the impact of the incident, and will continue taking additional steps as appropriate. I think the big deal here is that Johnson Controls is such a huge company. They are involved in things with the Department of Homeland Security. It says on September 28th, it was reported that they're investigating the breach if it has compromised sensitive physical security information, adding that the company, and they're referring to Johnson Controls, holds classified sensitive contracts for DHS security systems. So basically, Johnson Controls has in their possession, they have maps, if you will, or the data that explains physical controls that are in place at the Department of Homeland Security, it sounds like. And so when Johnson Controls gets breached, potentially could impact national security if they're able to get that data and use it to get into an embassy. Like if the bad guys are able to use that data to get into an embassy or to get into a Department of Homeland Security building, or anything like that. So potentially this is pretty bad.
What would be ironic is if you remember the Log4j incident, a lot of the Johnson Control software and devices were affected with that Log4j. So it'll be interesting to see later on. If there's any correlation.
This article is, as I'm going through it, right? It's it teeters on kind of alluding to those things, but it doesn't necessarily call them out for like what you just said right there, right? But the reality of it is if you have Department of Defense contracts, there's language in every Department of Defense contract that says you have to do these mandatory minimum cybersecurity requirements. And the big issue is, and why we see companies like this being attacked, is there's really no enforcement of it. And that's the whole point of CNMC and why we're moving away from NIST 800-171 as being the law of the land. That's a different conversation for a different day. But you see a major company like this, JCI, who has government contracts, who's basically being accused of not doing everything that they need to do as part of their cybersecurity contract. That's what I'm as part of their Department of Defense contract. That's what I'm reading in this article, which is some pretty damning accusations.
Right.
I mean, there is a thing called the Federal False Claims Act that if you're saying you're signing contracts and you're saying you're doing this stuff and you're not, your CEOs and your executives can be charged with the Federal False Claims Act under these contracts.
Interesting to see what's going to happen.
Yeah, it is.
100%. Yeah, I mean, and it's also interesting that, again, another one that we found out about in an SEC filing, not as it unfolded, and that's the luxury Johnson Controls has, because everything they do is pretty much behind the scenes. So only your customers are going to know about it, like the ones that buy your services for your facilities. It's really not going to affect the average person, the average consumer, so it doesn't hit social media like these other cyber attacks do. So how are we doing on time? Are we good, or we need to wrap it up?
I have a hard stop, so I need to run pretty quick.
All right. Well, guys, that's it. We're going to wrap it up, and thanks for your inputs. We'll see everybody. Next week. We're good, right? We're not together yet until the end of October. But we will see everybody in the next show. Remember, share the show, and we will see you next Tuesday. Take care, everyone.
All right.
All right. Bye-bye.